Hello, everyone. Hello, Sébastien.
Hello, everyone. Hello, everyone. How are you?
Good, good.
So let me share my screen. Just give me a little second. And we're ready to get started.
Ou est-ce qu'il y a une autre méthode alternative de paiement s'il ne peut pas fournir un compte entreprise?
Okay. Can you all see my screen?
Yes.
Perfect.
Je vais vérifier.
Okay. So good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the session on brand storytelling. My name is Sébastien Ioannitis-McColl. I've been working for the ITC for about 18 years now. And my expertise into marketing, branding, and e-commerce as well. So I happen to deliver a lot of training to companies and coaching to companies in terms of how to design their brand. We go into brand essence in terms of values, in terms of brand character, but also very important element of branding is the storytelling. And one of the objectives of storytelling is to try to connect with the customers. Basically, I would say a metaphor, an analogy that we could use for brand storytelling, it's like two people getting together, a man and a woman who create a connection. At the end of the day, it's an emotional connection that binds actually two people together. And that makes actually, although this link is transparent, the connection is so strong that even when two people have to be apart or to separate or to divorce, that very often this link is still there, whether it's because they still love each other or because they hate each other, it depends, but there is still this invisible link. And brand storytelling is about creating a connection between a person or people and the brand. And I'll give you a few examples later on, a few techniques on how to create this, this connection. You have to know that at the end of the day, we better sell actually with emotions than functions, than technicalities. There's a study that came out from McKinsey, which is the biggest management consulting company in the world, that says that basically 20% in a B2B context, 20% of the decision making when buying a product is based on emotions. And we tend to forget that because we put an emphasis on the product, which is 20%, and the price, which is 20% as well. So at the end of the day, those functionalities or those functional elements, they just account for the same as the emotions that we can build in a product which is sold through stories. So in terms of the objectives of today, we have a couple of hours. I'll try to maybe shorten it if I have the time, but I tend to talk quite a bit, so don't hesitate in any case to cut me off if you need to ask questions. But there are two things I'd like to talk about today is to give you actually the benefits of good storytelling and how important it is actually for your business, although I'm sure that now you understood my point, and also to give you a structure, a framework on how to build, I would say, kind of systematically a story. I'll give you two techniques, basically, starting with one which is called the Pixar model, which is used by Disney and Pixar for them to craft their stories and to sell their stories to children and parents. And there's another model which is derived from that as well, but which is not kind of a business-minded. So now a question to every one of you. Why do we tell stories and why are they so important, whether in business or in our daily lives? And please, the floor is yours. Yes, I think Ferzan. Ferzan, please tell us. We cannot hear you.
Right, I have a problem.
We cannot hear you, Ferzan.
I
think it's better now.
have a problem.
We still cannot hear you. No, we cannot hear you. Is there? No, Ferzan, sorry, we cannot hear you, Ferzan. Your voice is broken and very remote.
I have a connection problem.
Oh, okay.
Sorry.
No problem. So what I suggest is that someone else actually answers, and maybe you can fix the problem in the meantime, if you don't mind. So who wants to take the floor on this question? We have Kavita.
Yeah, hello.
Yes,
Am I
go ahead.
audible? Am I audible?
Absolutely, very well.
Yeah. So over the period of 4 years, I have realized that what you show on social media, what you show on LinkedIn, that only gets the high attention. I mean, you need to create a kind of series for yourself where you're showing how much impact you are creating with your work, with your handling that event, or how important that event was for you. So recently I have started creating sequence of events that I have attended on social media as well as on LinkedIn, so that I also get a high by seeing those events, whenever I move on to next phase of my work. And it is really helping me to remember the work that I have done in last 6 months and how far I have to go, considering the kind of work that I have done or the events that I have attended. And it is helping me a lot. I don't know about others, but personally on my level, I am feeling, yes, there is a better version of myself, and there's a better version of my business on social media and LinkedIn. So this is what is, I am feeling, and that's what I thought of sharing with you. Thank you so
Perfect.
much.
Thanks a lot for that, Kavita. And what I see in the chat box, I see to create a dialogue, absolutely, to make the audience interested, to get attention, especially because nowadays our attention is very scattered because we are bombarded by information and by instant messages and everything. So it's very important to get people's attention. This is probably the fight of the 21st century, I would say. Then stories create a connection, help align our listeners to us, and they generate an affinity and sympathy from our listeners. And Nadia says, psychologically, stories bring attention from the right side of the brain, so the human being will be more interested. So we'll see those brain elements a little bit later on, but yes, at the end of the day, it's all connected to neurosciences and how the brain actually functions. And we'll see that there's a difference in terms of the regions of the brain which are activated when we are in pure kind of non-narrative type of stories, and when we are in narrative type of stories or arguments, I would say. Excellent. Is there anyone else who wants to share their insights in terms of why do we tell stories and why they are important? Do you often tell stories, and in which occasions? To be emotionally attached to people, absolutely. In which occasions do you tell stories? In sales process, absolutely. What else? Marketing, yes. What else? Training of products, brand promotion, yes. Proposal writing, wine networking. What about in your private life? We've got Amarashish. Yes, please. Amarashish?
Hear me? Can you hear me?
Absolutely, please.
Yeah. So basically, from my 40 odd years in sales and marketing, and about a decade in digital marketing, what I feel is that the personal touch that we used to have about 20, 30 years back is gone. That is one thing. Now, what you do is your words only convey your thoughts, your speech, your emotions, whatever it is. Apart from that, to make it more exciting, if you can put up your story in actual audiovisual format, it will have a definite appeal there. Because normally the kind of products that we normally deal in would be more of very specific customer clientele appeal that we would be dealing in. So when those kinds of products that we are putting up on the showcase, the digital space, it needs to have a different kind of an emotive appeal, apart from, of course, generating the kind of interest that one needs to generate in the first place. Like opening up a shop, you have footfalls. You can entice a customer by showing him 10 footwears. But here you have a limited space, and that too a digital space, which is, though it is interactive, it is not really interactive in that sense.
Absolutely.
So you got to create your stories, you got to create your appeal, you got to create that sense of interest for your product.
Absolutely.
And if that is not created, then it's going to be very difficult to convince the people around. The other day I was watching a $1 million worth watch site, wristwatch site. Like, how can one pick up $1 million watch off the site? Just imagine. The site is Richard Mille. But what I got enticed upon is the kind of storytelling they did. Only the likes of Bill Gates, or maybe Steve Jobs and the other guys, Facebook guys, can buy a watch like that. Or Ambani's from India. But if you read that story, even I got appealed, I got swayed by the storytelling that website did. I can't buy it, I can't afford it, but yes, I can dream of it.
Absolutely, and you're totally right, Amarashish, especially, and I see
so if you can create that dream also of buying a product, I think tomorrow you are having a dedicated customer at your doorstep, your digital doorstep tomorrow.
Absolutely, and that rejoins what Kavita actually writes. She wrote, in the digital space, the personal touch is less. By telling stories, we can create personal touch. I totally agree with Amarashish. Indeed, we have created, through e-commerce, we have created an environment where there is less human connections. At the beginning, I would say it was fun because we were kind of in control. But at some point in time, it got dehumanized. And also during COVID, the COVID kind of exacerbated actually the situation in the sense that we had little touch with colleagues, with customers, with suppliers, and everything was just kind of functional type of relationships that we had, writing emails, chats, and everything without the personal touch. So human beings are social animals by default, and we miss actually this social touch. So I would say whenever we are into e-commerce, we have to try to recreate this link in a way that is relevant and that is and but that benefits also the e-commerce endeavor. In the sense, just a simple thing like really having a chat box, but having someone behind. When you go to the site, when the customer goes to the site, there is a real person talking, not just an AI engine that works every second time or that does not answer your questions. There must be a kind of connection that we need to create with the site and with the brand at the end of the day. So let's move on now to the next slide. And I'm going to talk to you about the Pixar model. You will see that I'll start with that, and at the end of this presentation, I'll show you another model, which is more kind of professional. But I thought it's actually a very good model to start with in order to illustrate what brand storytelling is about. So the guy, actually a very famous guy in the world called Daniel Pink, he's the one actually who deciphered the way Pixar and Disney were basically telling stories. And what he discovered is that they tell stories always the same way. And he gave actually this structure that Pixar, whenever they tell a story or a pitch for their movies, they start with once upon a time, and then every day. And then suddenly there is something happening, but one day. And to finish, because of that, or thanks to that, they say it a couple of times, and then until finally there's a resolution. So the way it translates now is that you first start with a context. Once upon a time, you basically set up the scenery. Then you have a conflict. There is a friction. There is a problem. There is something going wrong. This is what we call the conflict. And therefore there's a need for the customers, or a pain that the customer actually feels. Then we have the climax, basically when we reach actually the peak of emotions. This is where actually the solution gets introduced. And then the closure, the story actually ends normally happily. So here's a story from the pitch for Finding Nemo. Let me read it to you, and then I'll go through a business example using the same technique. So once upon a time, there was a widowed fish named Marlin, who was extremely protective of his only son, Nemo. Every day, Marlin warned Nemo of the ocean's danger and implored him not to swim far away. But one day, in an act of defiance, Nemo ignores his father's warnings and swims into the open water. Because of that, he's captured by a diver and ends up in the fish tank of a dentist in Sydney. Because of that, Marlin sets off on a journey to recover Nemo, enlisting the help of other sea creatures along the way, until finally Marlin and Nemo find each other, reunite, and learn that love depends on trust. And you will see that old stories from Disney, Pixar actually follow exactly the same kind of structure. So it's very good for brand storytelling. It's very good for sales pitching as well. But of course, you need to fine tune it a little bit because it looks too childish in a way. But at least it gives you a framework in terms of how to structure your story into the four stages that I just indicated to you. Now let me go through another story for a real business. It's about AIDS in Africa. Once upon a time in Africa, more than 39 million people had tested positive for HIV. Every day, thousands of people went to hospitals in Africa, sometimes on a makeshift basis, to try to get treatment, but also, unfortunately, to die of HIV. But one day, someone developed a self-test to diagnose people's HIV status even before they had any symptoms. Thanks to this, thousands of people were able to self-diagnose. And thanks to this, when the results were positive, it allowed people to seek early medical treatment. Until finally, the rate of people infected and dying from HIV began to decline. So this is just an example of a business of a solution or an offer that came out in order to be able to treat people more proactively of HIV and to reduce mortality due to late diagnosis. So what you can see here is that there are two things. There is a part which is functional. So we talk about the product itself, but there's a part also which is very much emotional. And also certainly the way I spoke and the emotion that you could sense in the tone of my voice, but also because the story is touching, because we know that there is an element which is devastating for the world and for Africa in particular. It creates a connection between us and the story and the continent and the people of Africa. So a story has two parts, one which is functional, but one which is emotional, and we sell better through emotions than functions. Is it clear to you? Is this structure clear to you? This is the full example here, so you'll have the presentation and you'll be able to go through the slides and everything. And here you have the structure, so the template for you to practice. Perfect. So let's start with a little exercise. So I'm going to create actually breakout rooms. We have like 49 people. It's quite a lot. We'll create breakout rooms of probably, let's say, 7 people altogether. And you have basically 10 minutes. So because we are very short of time, you'll have to cut it short in terms of saying hello to each other and everything. This is actually very important, to say hello and to connect with others, because you can work actually better once you know people. But just for the sake of time, I'll ask you just to try to cut this part very short, to decide on a story which is either personal or professional. It could be real or totally fictional, but as long as you agree with each other, try to use the Pixar model in order to build your story. So it has to be very short. Don't spend too much time. Don't go into too many details. The idea is just for you to practice. And then there will be one person per group to tell the story afterwards. So we'll probably listen to maybe not all of the stories, but maybe to half of the stories. So what I'll be doing is I'll be sharing the template, the model with you. So let me do that. Let me share that with you. I'll put it in the chat box, so you all have access to it. So you have the structure now. So what you'll have to do is basically follow the structure using a story that you agree with each other. So spend like 10 minutes on the story, and then we'll come back to the main room and you'll tell us your stories. Is that clear to everyone? Yes, yes, yes. So let me create the breakout rooms then. So you just have to accept to go to the different breakout rooms.
Hello.
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 Hello, are you listening? Do you
All
hear
right.
me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. So I'm Asma from Morocco.
Oh, you're from Morocco. Oh, wonderful. I'm from Kenya.
Oh,
We need to think about a topic. We haven't yet started anything.
wow.
Yes, so anyone willing to have a personal or professional story? I'm also trying to think of something.
Dan, I think you have the biggest story to tell. If you say as a personal story, that can be a professional story somehow.
Okay, that's fair. So let's see. Once upon a time, I think just to introduce myself, my name is Dan. I am based in Zambia, and I actually recently shared a personal story about how I experienced a technology layoff, which resulted in me pursuing e-commerce. So that's the theme of the story. Now, when we look at the template that we have, once upon a time, so I've shared the first half of the pitch, and I'm busy writing a second part. Any additions or suggested changes are more than welcome. But so far it reads, once upon a time, there was an IT enthusiast eager to lead with change. Every day he would eat, sleep, read, and share technology. But one day, and that's where I'm at now, I'm going on to the his part.
Oh, we're coming back to the...
All right. So it looks like a very abrupt termination of the session, but it's the way it is. Sorry about that. It kind of does it very roughly. So now let's just wait for everyone to come back. Okay, so let's get started. Who wants to get started with the first story?
Natasha, do you like to start?
Perfect. So please, Natasha.
Okay. I said, once upon a time, I held the dreams in my heart.
Mm-hmm. Yes. I think we lost you, Natasha.
Natasha, now muted.
I think we lost Natasha.
Yeah, she's now on mute. I'm not sure what's happening.
Okay, so maybe let's move on to Clara. Clara, please, you can take the floor.
Okay, good day, everyone. For room 3, once upon a time in Lebanon, there was a crisis for maternity wear, comfortable maternity wear. And then one day I decided to make maternity wear for women who are struggling to find maternity wear that is fashionable, comfortable, and customized to meet their different needs.
Okay.
Okay. Thanks to that idea, because of that, many women are now able to get what they want, and I'm also managed to get a business that is serving the community. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks for that. Good. We can see the 4 different stages. There's a few things that need to be reshuffled, but I think you got the idea in terms of having the context, the conflict, the climax, and the closure. So just a little bit of fine tuning. Who wants to take the floor? We have Eniaradzo. Please take the floor. Eniaradzo.
Take the floor means like you can speak. Oh no, I think the name. Anya.
Okay, so Chantel, maybe? We cannot hear you well, Chantel. Okay, so let me read what...
Daniel typed something.
Let me read what's written in the chat. Once upon a time, there was an IT enthusiast eager to lead with change. Every day, he would eat, sleep, read, and share technology. But one day, his journey took an interesting path where technology utterly shifted his direction. Thanks to what he went through, he discovered resilience, courage, and character. Because of that, today he runs an e-commerce business that enables small-scale farmers to group farm in order to meet local food demands. Thanks to this, mouths are fed and income is generated. Because of that, poverty is alleviated. And one day, and one at a time, skills are developed. Finally, problems are solved locally. That's very good. That's very good. Just maybe it needs to be shortened a little bit, but it's very good. Then we have someone from Au Grain de Sésame who writes, once upon a time, I decided to follow my dream and be my own boss. Every day was a challenging and exciting day. But one day I realized a lot of people appreciated my work. Thanks to storytelling. Because of that, I became a successful business entrepreneur until finally becoming a leader in my community. That's also very good. So I guess is there someone who wants to share their story?
Yes.
Yes, who's saying yes?
Hamed here saying yes.
Okay, so, please go ahead.
So King and I came up with this story as a group. So let me start now. Once upon a time, two founders started creative writing company, and they were finding difficult to get a foothold in the market. Every day, the founders were going to the internet media to sell more stories. But one day, the company had a story go viral. Because of that, business had gained momentum for the company until one day, it became one of the main storytelling publishers in the nationwide.
Excellent. Excellent. Thank you very much for that. So you see, at the end of the day, it's not very difficult to build a story using the Pixar model. Then I'll show you a little bit later on, a little bit more, I would say, fine tuning in order to make it more kind of business sexy in a way, because it looks a little bit childish now. But I think you understood very well the principles of how to structure a good story and how to create this emotional peak. So let's move on and let me share my screen with you. Right, so I guess, can you see my screen?
Yes.
Perfect. Yes. Okay. So let's move on. We've done that. So let me start giving you some definitions and the origins of storytelling. So first of all, storytelling of the brand is a tool that helps communicate about the brand through a story. Okay, it makes sense. It helps make sense of the brand and create an emotional connection between the brand and people to condition favorable behavior when making the purchase decision. So it could be purchase decision. It could be any type of behaviors. It could be building loyalty. It could be purchase decision. It could be making people more favorable to speak around them. So whatever behavior you want to have at the end of the day. So what's important here is the connection and the emotional connection in particular that we're trying to build. Exactly, again, I'm using the analogy that I gave you before, the analogy between a man and a woman getting together. And marriage is one thing, but what's important is this emotional connection that generated this behavior of getting engaged, for example. So this is invisible, but this is the most important link that we can have between two people. At the end of the day, all brands have a story. Some of those stories are expressed because it could be a deliberate intention from the owners or the marketing people to really build this story. So it's in the company, and sometimes it's not well expressed, but it's still there because every company has a story. Every company got created because of a purpose, because of a need, because of a problem. So it's just a matter of extracting this story and, I would say, making it flow and embellishing it in a way. One sentence that I gave you at the bottom here is that if you do not give a story to your market to talk about, then it's the market who is going to tell that story for yourself. So when we talk about branding, you have to be in control of your brand. You have to be in control of your offering. You have to be in control of what people say about you. Same, you have to be in control of your story. You wouldn't want people to say, to tell stories that you do not own or that do not represent you. So it's very important to have your story. And stories were created already a very long time ago. So here, what you see here is some wall paintings in the pyramids during the ancient Egyptian times. And you have to know that hieroglyphs used in Egypt was basically the first alphabet that was ever created, like about 3,000 years before our era. So in this case, this is the representation of the birth of Tutankhamun, about 1,300 years before our era. Then, since we have many people from Africa, and I thought that maybe we should talk about this community called the griots. This is a group of communicators, and mainly around the 11th century of our era, and the tradition is and still exists. This community still exists. The tradition is to transmit knowledge, stories, values orally to the community. And you have the representation of a storyteller, and it could be a person who sings, dances. So basically the tradition and the knowledge is transmitted from generation to generation or to the community through oral means. And if we go to Australia, I guess many of you know about the Aboriginals, and they used still doing it, mural paintings. Their paintings are mainly representing the supreme spirit beings and creators of the land and the people. So it's very religious because Aboriginal people are very much connected to their land and to the nature. And you can see that it dates back to like 50,000 years ago. And then we can even go to the origin of communication and language. Some people say it's minus 1 million, minus 2 million years before our era, when the language started actually to develop. So there's no real history, there's no real date in terms of when it was created, but at least probably when people started speaking, this is when we could say that stories probably originated. And then things got a little bit more formalized in ancient Greece, with especially with Aristotle, like 300 years before our era. And Aristotle basically said a good story has 3 components. One component is what he calls the logos, the facts, the logic, the structure. So this is very important, but it's not enough to have a good story. The second part of the story, this is what he calls the pathos. This is the emotions. And this is what we have in the story, and this is what we have to put an emphasis on. And the third element is the ethos, the credibility, the expertise, and also the ethics when telling a story. So a good story has 3 components: the logos, the pathos, and the ethos, according to Aristotle. So he was a great orator, a great philosopher and mathematician, at the same time, and a great believer in democracy and debates in general. And this is actually where people used to gather in amphitheaters in order to debate of societal issues in many cases. And of course, the best stories that we know are the stories that we tell to the kids. And I'm sure for those of you who have kids or nephews or nieces, or you have been dealing with kids in general, that they always ask you for the same stories all the time. You tell them a story one night, and the night after, they want the same story again. My kids do that to me. And I have to say that it used to bother me a little bit, but knowing a little bit about storytelling at the end of the day, I could understand actually why. Because for them, they live the story. They are immersed in the story. They are transported in the story. And so for them, in a way, the story and the reality just form only one. It's like when we're dreaming. We don't know when we're dreaming, and it happened to certainly to all of you, that we believe that our dream is the reality, and suddenly we wake up and we wonder, but is it the reality? Was it a dream? So the brain doesn't make any difference between the reality and the story. So this is very important. This is why when we tell a story, it has to be as vivid as possible, as visual as possible, as emotional as possible, so that people can connect with the story and live the story as if they were living the real situation. And so at the end of the day, the children, what they do, they identify themselves with the hero, and they fight the hero. And right after the story, they go and get a sword and they fight the dragon or the villain in general, because they feel like they are the hero. And in our digital world, we have what we call Instagram stories, for example, which is the modern way of telling stories and connecting with people. So this is just a little introduction about stories. Now, when it comes to, is there any questions, first of all? I should have asked before. So Kavita says, in India, we still tell our ancient stories on women clothes. Yes. Okay, so no questions. So let's move on. So the impact of stories now. This is what a neuroscientist, Jeremy Su, says, that 60% of our daily conversations are actually stories. Our mind is wired to tell stories and to be absorbed by stories. I'm sure it happened to some of you. For example, I remember when I was a kid, I used to jump from very high at the pool, like 10 meters high. And I remember on that particular day when jumping, in a span of 2 seconds before I reached the water, I saw my whole life going through my eyes. And it was basically the entire story of my life. And at the time, I was probably 12 or 13 years old. At the time, I did not understand that the way the brain actually works. But what my brain was telling me is actually the entire story of my life. When we come home in the evening, what I tell my kids is, I tell my kids what I did during the day. And I ask them to tell me what they did during the day. But the way that they say it as a story. It has a beginning, a middle, and an end. And this is the way we communicate in general. We just don't go by bullet points like we would do in a PowerPoint presentation. So we tell stories, and this is the natural way that we use to communicate. So our life is a story. Now coming back to the brain, and this is just a myth in a way. There is some truth in that, but it's a nice way of representing how the brain actually works with those two hemispheres. But it's, I would say, much more complex than that. Basically, we can represent the brain. There are two hemispheres in the brain. There's the left brain, which we say is more logical, and this is where we find the areas or the regions of speech, of language, of mathematics and everything. And we have the right part of the brain, which is more creative, which is more abstract, which is more artistic in general. And this is where emotions are expressed. It's not that simple in real life. It could be as simple as that for language, but when it comes to stories, and I will show you that later, you have actually connections between the two hemispheres of the brain that happen very fast. And basically all the parts of the brain get activated. So we cannot basically put stories into one part of the brain because every region of the brain is activated if the story is powerful enough. But it's a nice representation. Now, in addition to that, when we tell stories, it will be extremely important to cater for users' preferences. In terms of whether we talk about visual, there are people who are visual. So they understand information when they are visually represented through pictures, through movies, through graphs, through charts. So those people are visuals. There are some people who are more auditory. So they like to listen to sounds, to music. They are very sensitive to the intonation of the voice, for example. To the words that are used. And there are people who are more kinesthesics in the sense that in kinesthetic, we put the touch, what we touch with our hands. Also the way we are touched emotionally. So it's the body and the soul, basically, but it's also the olfactory sense. So with the nose, what we smell, and also the gustatory sense, what we taste with our mouth. And you have to know that those two senses are not very much used in general, but if you can try to use them, it's even better because they are directly connected to the centers of emotions, as opposed to the visual, auditory, and kinesthetic, as opposed to the visual and auditory senses, where there are more processing and more, I would say, barriers. So olfactory and gustatory are more connected to our inner emotions. So people have preferences in general, and it's good to cater for that. So when we tell a story, so we'll try to use words, for example, which create pictures in the head of a person. So if I tell you about the blue color, if I tell you about a square, if I tell you about the green grass in the meadows, so you can already figure out in your head those different pictures. So you have to use what we call visual predicates, which are words which will create those visuals in your head. Same for auditory. So you will have to use words like to whistle or to utter, loud, low, volume. These are words that will create sounds in people's heads. And same for kinesthetic, you have to use words that also, or predicates that invite people to feel. So if you use words like to touch, to feel, to sense, to move, to run, so these are words that create motion and create emotions. So motion and emotion at the same time. So when telling a story, basically try to use words which are visual, auditory, and kinesthetics at the same time. Now comparing facts and stories. So of course facts, and we saw it with Aristotle, they said your story has to contain a logos component. So the logic, the facts, which are important. But most importantly is your story has to use elements which are emotional. So you can be dramatic, you can put emphasis, you can use the tone of your voice and modulation in your voice. You can talk about your experience as well in order to create emotions. And those emotions, those emotional stories will be more powerful than the facts at the end of the day. So according to one of the best business schools in the world, Northwestern Kellogg, they say that stories have an impact between 2 to 50 times greater than facts when it comes to convincing others. 2 to 50 times, it really depends on how your story is built. You have stories which are weaker than others, and you have very powerful stories which are very touchy. I don't like quoting Joseph Stalin, one of the biggest, I would say, murderers in the world, but he said to me one truth, which is 1 death is a tragedy and 1 million deaths is a statistic. I'm sure you've all seen those pictures on TV. I remember, I think it was during the war in Syria. I think there was a Turk, a soldier who picked up a kid which was actually dead on the beach, and we saw him actually in his arms. So this is more, I would say, impactful in terms of telling a story, because we can feel empathy for this person who picks the boy, but also we can feel empathy for the boy as well, especially if we have children ourselves. But if you tell that 1 million people actually died, in a way, yeah, it's a statistic. It's sad, very sad, but we feel less connected at the end of the day. Mother Teresa said, if I look at the mass, I will never act. If I look at one individual, then I will act. Because if you look at one individual, you look at the story of that person. You try to understand the person deep inside. So, and this is the emotional part, the story, whatever surrounds that person in general. And then we have Daniel Kahneman, which is American psychologist and economist, and he won a Nobel Prize in economics, behavioral economics. And he says, no one has ever made a decision based on the number. We need a story. And let me show you a video from Northwestern Kellogg, talking about Daniel Kahneman, because Daniel Kahneman also worked on the resolution of the conflict between Israel and Palestine. So let me just get started with the video, and I hope you can hear it.
25 years before the Carnegie Mellon research that looked at fact versus story in people's decision-making, Daniel Kahneman, the Nobel Prize-winning psychologist, also was convinced that stories were more powerful than facts, and he set out to prove it in a high-stakes situation. Working as an advisor to Israeli leaders who were increasingly worried about a conflict with neighboring Syria, he sought to convince these leaders of the probability of an invasion with statistics, facts. Kahneman figured he could boil down the probability of invasion to a number, and this percentage chance would be a powerful motivator. It didn't work. These leaders simply didn't trust his numbers. They trusted what they felt to be true. The superior air power of Israel would preempt an invasion from an inferior force. This was exactly the intuition that had caused an error in judgment in the Yom Kippur War when Egypt invaded Israel, and it was happening again. Kahneman was surprised that even though this instinct of the leaders had led them to be unprepared for an attack from Egypt, history was repeating itself. They trusted their guts, not the facts. This showed Daniel Kahneman that stories were so much more powerful than facts, and it led him on a journey to figure out why. After this experience with the Israeli leaders, Kahneman was quoted as saying, "No one ever made a decision because of a number. They need a story." This is striking in that it implies that people disregard facts in favor of stories. And this is something that he went on to prove over and over again with his longtime research partner, Amos Tversky, across 4 decades of research, ultimately winning Kahneman the Nobel Prize for founding what is now known as behavioral economics. This is instructive for us as sellers, as human beings. Too often, we attempt to persuade with facts. The 3 features that make our solution better than others, the performance metrics associated with our approach, the results we've attained for another customer. These are just numbers. And it's frustrating to think it, but they're just numbers. people say, wait a minute, we've worked hard to obtain these results. We've invested tons in building this company and its product. These features are important. This is all true. But then tell the stories. Don't leave this discussion at the level of facts. They are just not compelling. People need a story.
Okay, I think this is very enlightening. Of course, the way he tells the story is from the American perspective. So when I show this video to, for example, to Egyptians, for example, then they see things from a different perspective. The conclusion still remains the same, but maybe the historical facts are different depending on where you are from. So having said that, yes, story is very important, and stories are even more important than just simple numbers.
25 years.
Okay. This is a great video as well. I want to show you. There's no sound basically.
What did you do to my sign?
I wrote the same, but in different words.
Thanks, love.
Now tell me, after watching this video, how do you feel, emotionally speaking? I think, wow, it's great. Deep emotions. What else? Touching. Yeah. So when you tell stories, at the end of the day, what we want to do is actually to touch people's heart. And yes, unforgettable. So you will remember that. It's a very important word, actually, because it has a memory element. When we are touched deep inside, there's a lot of neural activity in the brain, and there's a lot of connections that happen between neurons that make actually this story stick in the brain, because the connections are so strong. Then we will remember the stories or situation, moment, or person for much longer. And when there is so facts is one thing, but if on top of facts you add emotions, those connections between the neurons are even stronger. So the thing is that at the end of the day, we have what we call an associative memory. Our brain basically reorganizes itself continuously, creates new neuronal connections. And the more we are exposed to a situation, the stronger those neuronal connections actually are. So if, for example, you tell a story which is visual, there will be connections that will build actually in the visual part of your brain, which is at the back of your brain, basically. And if on top of that you use predicates, which are also auditory, then there will be connections that will be built in the auditory part of the brain. Same for kinesthetic. So the more your story is touching emotionally, visually, auditory, olfactorily, and gustatorily, the more connections will build actually in your brain, and therefore the story will stick. You will remember, and this will change your beliefs in order to induce a favorable behavior towards purchasing a product, towards being more loyal to a brand, etc., etc. This is just an example. I told you before that language is very well located in the brain. There are basically two areas in the brain where language is actually processed. There is what we call the Broca area, where there is processing and understanding of the language. And there is also the Wernicke area, where there is also some understanding of the language. But when language is just language, arguments, basically, I would say, just to be simplistic, those two areas of the brain that get activated. Now, if we tell a story where you see I've put some words here, like she asked coolly with concern, she jumped at the phone, empty bag of potato chips. So basically, you tell a whole story that include all those elements. So there are some elements of smells with the potato chips. There are some elements of kinesthetic, like she jumped at the phone, some visuals in terms of you can see the phone, you can see the shoes, the desk, the empty chips bag. So this is visual. You have gustatory elements as well, which are embedded into the story. Of course, you have the processing, understanding of the language as before, but here you have many more areas that get activated in the brain. And the thing is that it creates a neural network. So those different areas, at the end of the day, they get connected through neuronal connections. And the more neuronal connections there are, the more people actually remember the story, especially if there is an emotional component, and emotions are managed by the amygdala. So, which is at the bottom of the brain, which is the red component that you can see here, which I'm highlighting here. And what you can see as well is that here you have also the centers of taste and the center of smell. This is why those two senses, because they are very close to the amygdala, they create a lot of emotions. I don't know if it happened to some of you, but me, sometimes when I smell a smell, or I taste something that I used to try or to smell when I was a kid, 2-3 years old, there's a lot of things actually that come up, and those senses are not very much used. It's used in some instances. Here, I'll give you an example. The science behind that is called neuromarketing, but whatever. The thing is, during Christmas time, here in Geneva, very often in big malls, they put a scent of Christmas tree. And therefore, it's the scent actually that goes across the entire shop. And people feel that it's the spirit of Christmas. And therefore, because I smell the Christmas trees, therefore I'll be proper actually to buy. They do that on fruits and vegetables. They put some smells of bananas, because nowadays the fruits and vegetables that we get in Geneva, they are not of good quality, I have to say, not of good tastes. So for people to buy, they add a color on top of some of the fruits, like bananas, like oranges, for example, but also the smell. So the smell is stronger and you feel like buying. Everything happens subconsciously. And because of that, it goes directly down to our emotions, and we are propelled actually to buy. So a story makes an emotional connection with customers, and this is what we want to do. One thing which is very interesting now, and it goes also to some theories about attachment. And there's a great psychologist called John Bowlby in the 1970s who came up with a theory of attachment and loss, especially with kids and babies. And there's a great guy, used to be a professor of mine, Joel Kohlheiser, from business school in Switzerland, IMD. He wrote an excellent book called Hostage at the Table. And basically, he teaches about leadership in general. And his theory is that the best leaders on this planet are those guys who are able to create a bond, a connection between them and between the people within the company. That creates loyalty, that creates the energy for people to move on into the direction given by the leader. Because at the end of the day, if the leader has no charisma, if it doesn't get connected with the people, then the people will go into scattered directions, and then the company will not be able to move into the given direction. Especially in times of crisis, you need people actually to get together and to get moving in order to go beyond those hard times. So his theory is that, yes, at the beginning, you have to create a sense of attachment, which is proximity and which is non-emotional. And then in a way, you have to create the emotional bond, emotional proximity. In a way, it's like being friends with someone. The problem with that is that the closer you are to your people, the more difficult the separation is. If the person dies, if the person has to leave, if you have to fire the person, the separation is actually quite difficult, because this invisible link is so strong. And then you'll be entering into a grieving period like you would do with a friend who passes away, for example. So this is exactly the same process. And the connection between a brand and a person follows exactly this attachment cycle from John Bowlby and George Kohlheiser. So this is very much used also in leadership theories. So there's no difference between two people loving each other, a person loving a brand, and a leader leading his people. This is exactly the same theories. Nowadays, we try to make things very complicated in terms of management and leadership, but if we try to be more humanistic, if we try to create this connection with people, then we'll be connected to them, and then we'll be able to better influence them. So I won't go through that because I've just mentioned it to you, but this is just a description of the attachment, bonding, separation, and grieving phases. Now you may ask me, but if stories are so powerful, why don't we use stories? Why businesses don't use stories all the time? This is true, and I give you some reasons here. Some people don't know how to do it, but even before that, some people don't even know that storytelling is a tool that could be used. Some people think that it's too childish. Stories are for kids. So there is ignorance, there is fear, there is lack of importance given to it. If it was so easy, why wouldn't everyone do it? So, and there are some people who are just afraid in general into going into something which they do not master. So there are many reasons why we don't do it, but at the end of the day, this is one of the simplest tools that we can use. So why not use it? And we saw just through a few videos before with this homeless person, how a story can be very impactful and can create a lot of emotions. So just a few sentences here. The public wants us to make them dream, to talk to them differently, to explain to them, to tell them. And story builds and enriches the image we want to show and share. It is an art of convincing by emotion, by creating associations in the brand of the targeted persons. One thing which is important is that if you put like 100% of your effort on the emotions, then you may enter into, I would say, some kind of ethical issues, because it may be considered as unethical or unfair or manipulation. So you always have to be careful to have, I would say, a good dosage in terms of what you do. In any case, the purpose of a business, at the end of the day, a business has to fulfill the promise. So if you just, I would say, play on the emotional side and you don't fulfill the promise, you'll be manipulating people. So you can play on the emotional side, but at the same time, please be sure to fulfill your promise. Otherwise, you will lose your credibility. And the word of mouth will make it that your business will not run for too long because people will say bad things about you. I'll just pass that. I will pass that. Okay, there's a few stories to avoid. Those which are arrogant, those who badmouth at people in general. I would say those stories in general which tend to be quite negative. Even those stories where basically you put down your competitors. If you want to show how different you are from the competitors, don't talk about the competitors. Tell a story about how good you are. And by definition, people will make the comparison with the competitors. So be careful when telling stories because they can actually backfire at you if you are too negative. And sometimes also it's very interesting to show some weaknesses in your story to show that you have failed somehow. You're not a failure, but sometimes you have to show some vulnerabilities, because if you give a story which is, or stories which are always perfect, then at the end of the day, people will tend to not really believe you. So try to also show some vulnerabilities when you tell your stories. Is that clear for everyone so far? I see a question from Kavita. I would like to create a story for my brand. Where should we start first? I'm going to come to that, and I'll give you actually a framework, which is based on the Pixar framework, but you will see that it's fairly simple to follow this process. So structure of a good brand story. So here we are. There's a lot of theories about that, and basically brand storytelling, it's like movies in general, and I talked about Pixar story pitches, but you have to know that all the movies that we see on TV nowadays, they follow the same structure. This is called the journey of the hero, or the hero's journey from Campbell. And it's exactly the same thing where you have basically a context, then you have a situation, a conflict, a climax, and then you come back to a new normality. So here you have the different stages, but I'm going to show you a little video that explains that for one of the blockbusters. So here you go.
To begin, how to start. I'm hungry. Coffee and a muffin. Okay, so I need to establish the themes. Maybe banana nut. That's a good muffin.
Have you ever felt like you're stuck in a creative loop? You start a script, get halfway done, but because you can't figure out that ending, you abandon it. Then start a new one. Then it happens again and again. So writer-director Dan Harmon tackled this exact problem. He took centuries of storytelling principles and turned them into an easy-to-use guide for building a compelling story. 1 circle, 8 steps. Understanding good narrative structure won't just make you a better writer, it'll make you a better storyteller. Today, we're going to be looking at Christopher Nolan's The Dark Knight, a film with a seemingly complex plot that we can break down into the 8 simple steps of the story circle. Step 1, you, the protagonist. By calling the first step you, we create an active tense, which creates an active drive. The you in The Dark Knight is Bruce Wayne. In this step, we also establish the status quo of this world. And as you know, Bruce's status quo is to fight crime. Step 2 is need. You need. Adding a need for your protagonist begins their story. In The Dark Knight, there's a scene where Alfred says to Batman,
"Know your limits, Master Wayne."
Batman has no limits.
Well, you do, sir.
It may be time to hang up the cape. That's the external need. However, the internal need is that Bruce also wants to be with Rachel.
You once told me that if the day came when I was finished, that we'd be together.
Bruce, don't make me your one hope for a normal life.
So now, Bruce Wayne needs a third thing. A replacement.
He doesn't want to do this for the rest of his life. How could he? Batman is looking for someone to take up his mantle.
Someone like you, Mr. Dent?
Maybe.
Step 3 is go. You go. This is where your main character enters the chaos realm of the circle. Batman needs a replacement, so he actively seeks that out in the form of Harvey Dent, the new promising DA.
I believe that on his watch, Gotham can feel a little safer.
But Harvey also has needs. He needs to capture Lau, a key individual in Gotham's organized crime scene. If Batman can deliver Lau to Harvey, Harvey can then put him in prison, which allows Bruce Wayne to retire Batman and be with Rachel.
If I get him to you, can you get him to talk? I'll get him to sing.
End of movie, right? Not quite. Step 4, search. You search. When go doesn't work, you have to keep searching. This is where the writer has to put a host of roadblocks between the protagonists and their need. Just because Batman caught Lau doesn't mean Gotham is any safer. As they celebrate their victory, a new kind of criminal crashes the party.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen.
This pushes Bruce Wayne's drive into a higher gear as the Joker unleashes a new crime wave on Gotham.
Some men aren't looking for anything logical. Some men just want to watch the world burn.
Section 5, find. You find. This step is critical. Here, the protagonist finds what they were looking for in step 2, but it doesn't quite go the way they expected. In fact, things go sideways.
Batman must take off his mask and turn himself in. Oh, and every day he doesn't, people will die.
Therefore, Bruce Wayne decides to take off the mask, but before Bruce has a chance to do it,
I am the Batman.
and once again, Bruce's seemingly great plan is foiled. Take. You take. Because once you get your hands on whatever it is that you want, you have to take it. But that may also mean that you have to pay the price, as Dan Harmon puts it. In this case, Batman finally captures the Joker. But the Joker reveals his trump card.
Where are they? Choose between one life or the other. Your friend, the district attorney, or his blushing bride to be.
And he gives Batman a false location for both of them. So Batman mistakenly rescues Harvey, but Rachel... This is the price Bruce pays. The loss forces Bruce to reconsider his future, and indeed his initial need. Now he has no reason to retire Batman. The lesson here is that you have to push your antagonist to the brink. It can't just be something bad, it has to be something totally devastating.
But Rachel, Alfred.
Rachel believed in what you stood for. What we stand for. Gotham needs you.
Step 7 is return. You return. He's emerged from the Chaos Realm, but has suffered a heavy loss. He's returning back to the start, altered by his experiences in the second act, but now equipped with a new need. And Gotham still needs him, because the Joker has flipped Harvey's moral coin. He is now Two-Face. No, not that Two-Face. This one. Two-Face has a need of his own as well, to avenge Rachel's death.
The Joker's just a mad dog. I want whoever let him off the leash.
As these characters come to a head, what they have become on this journey is finally exposed. Change. You change. Change has to be made visual. This is often called testing the change, or the final showdown.
What did you do?
I took Gotham's White Knight, and I brought him down to our level.
Batman has to stop Harvey. Unfortunately, the only way is to kill him. Thus, he takes blame for Harvey's crimes and becomes the Dark Knight.
They must never know what he did. I killed those people.
A villain made to absorb the chaos of Two-Face in order to preserve the heroism of Harvey Dent.
A hero. Not the hero we deserved, but the hero we needed.
Which brings us full circle. A hero's growth is often demonstrated by returning them to the start of the story. Everything may look the same, but the hero is now different. The journey not only changed Bruce, it changed Batman, and that's what makes this a great Batman story. So, if you're stuck in the middle of that creative loop and can't find a way to finish your script, just think about the story circle. And don't worry, you don't need to memorize all of this. You can click on the link in the description below and download a free Story Circle worksheet to plot out your own story. Also, be sure to check out Studio Binder for more videos and storytelling resources just like this one. We'll see you in the next video.
He's a silent guardian.
So here you go. So here you have the 8-step process for building a story, or the process which is used to build movie scripts. And most of the modern movies actually are based on this process. And the process that I showed you at the beginning with context, conflict, climax, and closure is actually a simplification of this one. And I'm going to come back to it in just in a few seconds. So at least you understand that it comes from somewhere. This is more or less what you saw, but in a textual manner from the movie. But I will not go into those details here. So this is actually the most important tool that I wanted to show you, which you can see that you have context, conflict, climax, and closure again, except that here we give you actually more elements. So the context, as I mentioned to you before, that sets actually the scene. It establishes why the audience should care, it creates engagement, and it unlocks the why, the who, the where, and the when. So it sets the scenery. Then you have the conflict, where you have the problem, where you have the friction, the tension, where there is an urgency to act, otherwise the situation will deteriorate, and it unlocks the what and the how. And then you have the climax, where you have the peak of the emotion, and where things actually get to heights, either positive or negative. It could be very high or very low in terms of emotions. So it's the what, the how, and the why. And then you have the closure, where the two, as they said in the movie before, where the two worlds come to a change, into a new beginning in a way. So that summarizes the lessons that were learned, that highlights the call to action, in the business case, to buy, to talk, to whatever, that creates enlistment, engagement, and it unlocks the so what. And when we talk about this bell curve, then we talk about two axes or two arcs. One is the business arc. So you see that you have 4 stages. So it's kind of very logical in a way. It's very structured. So this is the business arc. There's a beginning, middle, and end. And then we have what we call the emotional arc, where you can go either very high in terms of climax, in terms of emotions. So it could be very positive emotions, or it could be very negative emotions in terms of fear, in terms of hatred, or this kind of thing. So you can play with the emotional arc. If you don't play with emotions, then you just have a flat business arc, which is just factual. And the emotional arc allows you to create this bell curve. And this is important actually for a few things, because what we are going to ask you is, we ask you to create this modulation, but working on both arcs at the same time can get actually very complicated. So it's too many things for the brain. So what we do is we first tell you to work on the business arc. So let's take the context, the conflict, the climax, and the closure. And what we ask you to do is to basically lay down some bullet points about the context. I'll give you a context here. So this is a woman who was going to a party. First bullet point, as part of the context. In 1998, she decided to found a company. The thing is that she didn't want to wear pantyhoses. She wanted to wear pantyhoses, but she didn't want to wear the socks. So she decided to cut the bottom of the pantyhoses in order to not to be bare feet. That woman used to sell fax machines. So this is very factual in terms of context. Then we move to the conflicts and we list the bullet points. She called a lot of people in order to try to sell her idea. She knocked at many doors and all those doors got slammed on her. She contacted many mills in North Carolina. No one understood her idea. Most, I would say, investors or whatever were men, and they did not understand, or they didn't want actually to connect with her because she was a woman. And there was no female patent lawyers to register her idea. These are the bullet points. I'm not putting any emotions in that. And now the climax, then she kept pushing. She never lost enthusiasm. Then she met 3 daughters from a mill, and she convinced actually those 3 daughters, who then convinced their dad in order to partner. The business actually took off and she became a billionaire. And the closure, the bullet points, at the end of the day, we summarized, there was waves of rejection, but she showed resilience. She had a great mindset. She was very knowledgeable. She was skilled and very disciplined. And at the end of the day, she showed actually her biggest strength, which was grit. So you see here, I just took care of the business arc. So when you design the story of your business, don't try to do everything at the same time. Just build those 4 columns: context, conflict, climax, and closure, and try to lay down the different elements under each phase. So this way you'll build the business arc. Now, once you've done that, you have the structure of your story. Then you can start injecting emotions into it. If you put emotions into it, and I'm not going to read that because this is very long, you first write something which has a lot of details. And you see you have a first part, which is about the context here, which is quite long. So I'll start very quickly. Back in 1998, Sarah Blakely was getting ready to go to a party, and she had selected a pair of cream-colored pants. And she wanted to wear a pair of her pantyhose underneath her pants to get the slimming effect that the hose would give her. But she also wanted bare feet for her look. So what did she do? She simply cut the feet off of the pantyhose, and $1 billion idea was born. And this goes on. So you see there's a lot of details. So first you just jot down all your ideas with respect to the table that you built before. So this is the second cut. Then you have the same part for the conflict. Then you have it for the climax. And then you have it for the closure. And then, because you have too many details, you go through the third cut. And then you have a very short type of story with less details, and it looks cleaner. And this one, I'm going to read it to you. So back in 1998, Sarah Blakely was getting ready to go to a party, and she had selected a pair of cream-colored pants. And she wanted to wear a pair of her pantyhose underneath her pants to get the slimming effect that the hose would give her. But she also wanted bare feet for her look. So what did she do? She simply cut the feet off of the pantyhose, and $1 billion idea was born. In the 7 years that led her to the breakthrough idea, Sarah had been selling fax machines. She didn't even get any leads. She just had 4 zip codes that she could sell to. and her boss gave her a phone book and as a only sales tool. As Sarah herself says, I would wake up in the morning and drive around cold calling from 8 until 5. It was not long before I grew immune to the word no and even found my situation amusing. But if she thought that was a sales challenge, it was nothing like the challenge she faced with her Spanx idea. The man who ran the mills to make the product found it impossible to understand her simple yet powerful idea. So this is the conflict. But she kept pushing. She would not take no for an answer. She just kept calling and showing up. One day, 3 daughters of a mill owner in North Carolina insisted that their dad talk to her. And a prototype, a brand, a company, and a billionaire were made, not born. So this is the climax. What enabled Sarah to power through wave upon wave of rejection? A mindset, knowledge, skill, discipline, and habit. She had a mindset of resilience, even joy at being turned away, selling fax machines, and now Spanx. In a word, she had grit. So you can see that from the business arc, we now added modulation. We now put everything in order, and we added those nice visual, auditory, and kinesthetic predicates in order to make the story more emotional, more impactful, in order to bring the emotional arc, I would say, to the highest possible level. So when designing a story, just carefully construct the emotional impact intended for the listener. The first version of your story is functional, so the business arc only, the 4 columns, and it just gets the job done. And then you need to add the emotional elements into it through the different cuts. Okay. Look, for the sake of time, I'm not going to do the exercise because I really want to finish on time. It's an exercise that lasts about 15 minutes, and then we debrief for 5 minutes. So I don't want actually to finish late. But just let me tell you the exercise, how it goes, basically, and how you can do it for your own business. Try to think of how you started your business, for example. It could be because you had a brilliant idea, because you had a need or a pain, or because one day you saw you had a customer and that customer actually had a big problem and you thought, let's come up with an idea. And so you lay down your business arc in terms of context, conflict, climax, and closure. And as I did before, you put down the different bullet points. Don't think of making something emotional. It's not the right moment. And once you do that, then you go through the writing. So you take the elements of context and you write 1 or 2 paragraphs. Then you go to conflict, you take the bullet points and you write 1 or 2 paragraphs. Same for climax and closure, trying to make sure that now there is this modulation in terms of conflict and climax, that we really see that there's a problem, that there was a great pain, there was a great need to be fulfilled. And the best stories are those stories where the customer is at the center, where the customer is the protagonist, the one having the pains, the one having the needs to be filled. And then you can go through different types of cuts after that in order to shorten your story and to beautify your story. If you're not good at writing in general, there's a lot of services online in terms of copywriting. And the moment you build your business arc, you have to build the business arc. Then you can give your table to a copywriter who just for $50 or $100 can write you a beautiful story with a proper English language, if this is something which you're not comfortable with. So now the 7 C's of a good story. So it has to be clear. Try to remove any kind of complexities. Don't try to give an ambiguous message. Be clear. And I put here the grandma test in the sense that tell your grandma or your parent, or your mom, or whomever, tell the story to your grandma and try to see if your grandma understands it, or even your kid. So these are the most genuine people and they'll tell you. It has to be concise. This is why you have to go through the different cuts. And Pascal used to say, if I had more time, I would have made it shorter. Making something short is something extremely difficult. Be careful because people have limited attention. So you have so much of their time. So try to be concise in order for them to be fully focused and to be attached to the story from beginning to end. Try to be coherent and credible. In terms of coherence, you have defined your values, you have defined your vision, your mission, and your story has to reflect some of those elements. You cannot have a story which is totally disconnected from your vision, from your values, from your brand character, etc., etc. So you have to be coherent from end to end. Customer focus. So the customer has to be at the center of the equation. Why? Because if the customer is at the center, the customer will see him or herself in the story, will be able to feel the problems, will be able to connect to the story because he feels the problems, and therefore will be able to develop a positive behavior towards your brand and your products. Cohesive, well-structured. This is why we gave you this four-step process. Convincing, so you can use vocabulary like VACOG, the visual, auditory, kinesthetic, olfactory, and gustatory, which makes the story also more sticky. And it has to encourage action in terms of buying at the end of the day. And it has to have a functional part and an emotional part. You have to think and feel at the same time. And sticky, I've just mentioned about VACOG. So sticky, it has to stay in the head. It has to be memorable. People have to remember a story. If it's too long, they don't remember. If it's too complicated, people will not remember. So try to be concise and simple in order to make it sticky. Okay. Any questions? So we just have like 5 minutes for questions. So just tell me what you think of the session that we had today. If you think this is useful, if you learned something, if there's something you did not understand. So whatever comes across your mind, please don't hesitate to share. Oh, ChatGPT. Okay, that's a big question. We see that stuff absolutely everywhere on TV, on the web, and everything. Look, I've been using it actually quite a few times. I must admit that I would say it's good to get started with at the beginning. Sometimes, if you like a bit of inspiration, it can give you a direction, but it will never replace. Hoping that you're talking about storytelling here, but it will never replace you as the owner or the manager of the company in terms of building this business arc, because ChatGPT doesn't know about your business. So you can give it elements. It will certainly give you some good hints from time to time. Just try to pick and choose what's necessary. But at the end of the day, I believe more in the human touch rather than this kind of AI type of software. So it's good for inspiration, actually, and I use it quite a bit in order to get some directions or inspiration. So no problems with that. So I think it's worth a training session. So rich, so important, especially to exercise the 4 steps context, conflict climax closure. Absolutely. In any case, you will have. I'll share with you the presentation, you'll have the recording, but read again the story of this Sarah girl with this big idea with respect to those pantyhoses, and go through the table again, go through the second cut and the third cut, and you will impregnate yourself with the way to build the story. Even the Pixar storytelling technique is actually great. So it allows you basically to structure according to those 4 stages as well. Judith says, I arrived late to the talk. Will this be recorded? It's recorded, absolutely, and will be shared with you, no problem at all. Any other questions, remarks, insults? Excellent, best use of my time. One of the most useful webinar I've taken. I really learned a lot. Please share the links to the videos as well. Thanks. Thanks a lot for that. Very much appreciated. Very informative and good session. Thanks a lot for your time and insights. Many things to implement. I would appreciate you can plan in 2 sessions. I can last a full week if you want on this topic. I must admit that in the first place, it was agreed to do it in 1 hour. And what I said to the Ecom Connect team is, look, I cannot do it in 1 hour. Already 2 hours is difficult because there's so much to say. So I must admit that I had to cut a lot of information off this session. But I would say the biggest part of such sessions is actually to do it, I would say, face-to-face in a real training where we can really practice through real life exercises. Here we are really kind of limited also in terms of what we can do. So excellent presentation. Yes, please.
Yeah, I was saying thank you, Sébastien, for the presentation today. And I think everyone enjoyed it today. And there was a lot of information. So maybe we can ask you as well to share some of materials, resources on the live feed of Ecom Connect. So it will be also an added value, and we can all look and read additional information and discover more details on how to improve our storytelling and how to impress people around us. So if you
Absolutely.
can do that, that will be great.
Yes.
If you can add more materials and resources on the live feed.
Yes, absolutely. One document that comes to mind is I have a thematic sheet on the VACOG predicates. So verbs, nouns, adjectives, and expressions, which are visual, auditory, kinesthetic, olfactory, and gustatory. So this is a great dictionary to be inspired. It's quite comprehensive. It took me a lot of time to build it, but it's a great resource. I have some other resources which I can share easily that do not need any training in that. So I can do that with great pleasure.
Thank you. I think that will be great.
Yeah, I have something to say if I'm allowed.
Yes.
Yeah. So, Sebastian, what I feel that the first session can be the informative session where we get to know what exactly is storytelling in detail through whatever a set of stories you have shared. Those are really good. And maybe a second session where we get to know exactly how we can use it for our business, maybe some practical session on, creating our own stories, maybe getting some kind of template we are able to create where you feel, yes, now 50% of the work is done through learning. Now rest we can do on our own. That would be really, hands-on learning experience would be really helpful if you plan this way. Because I was searching on internet, there's so much material available on storytelling, and I never used it for my brand and for myself. So I am looking forward to learn a lot, but it would be really grateful that, how a small business can benefit, emotions are there. We get connected with the people, the story that you shared the very first time. I got instantly connected, but how people can connect with my small brand, what is my vision and how I'm going to work towards it is something that we would need, initial, a push, from your end. So I would really appreciate if you can plan one more session for us, maybe after a couple of days or weeks, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, where we can just learn on our own, plan stuff, and then we can ask you set of questions and get ready to go for ourselves as a brand. Okay. Something like this. Yeah, okay. Thank you so much.
This is very well noted. So I'll see with colleagues, and then I'm sure there will be no issue in order to plan that. I see a comment here. Hopefully I find someone who use the VACOG details in marketing. It's true that it's quite rare to see VACOG used in marketing. It's a term which is used, which comes actually from NLP, neuro-linguistic programming. And NLP is very famous type of theories that came out like 40, 50 years ago. Basically, it's about modeling excellence in general. And there are different disciplines or different components that we learn in NLP. And one of them is the VACOG, because we have different modalities. We capture information from the outside world through our different senses. And sometimes we have preferences. We process also this information using different modalities as well. So VACOG is a very important tool, and this is why I thought of sharing it with you. And this is why I included it also into storytelling, because storytelling is a transdiscipline, is a discipline which is transversal to many other disciplines. So it's good to take actually the good stuff. I thought it was good to take the good stuff from different disciplines, which I like, which I fancy. Look, I think this is time to depart. So I'd like to thank you very much for your time, for your attention, for your very nice comments. And I hope to see you very soon, hopefully in the upcoming weeks for additional sessions, if we can plan that as soon as possible. So thank you very much, and I wish you a very nice day to all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a great evening.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye.